Today we're talking about something that comes up all the time in filmmaking and photography circles. What focal length is the closest to what the human eye sees? It can be a highly debated question, and the correct answer is, well, it depends. My name is Timothy Reese, and I've worked in the television, film, and photography world as a director of photography and a photographer for nearly 20 years. Check out my videos as we cover not only the how, but also the why of various technical and creative techniques used in the creation of real images. Let's start with the simplest piece, the actual physical focal length of the human eye. The eye as a literal optical system. If you treat the eye the same way you treat a camera lens and measure from the eye's lens to the retina, the focal length comes out to about 17 millimeters. There's another complicating factor in that your eyes breathe similar to a lens depending upon what you're focused on. So the 17 millimeter equivalent can actually range between 17 and 22 millimeters. Now these are all anatomical numbers, but they don't really describe how we experience visual perspective. Because if our eyes truly felt like a 17 millimeter lens, everything would look extremely wide, with possibly some fisheye distortion, and your daily walk through life would feel more like a GoPro commercial. Obviously that's not the case, however, here's a neat trick to showcase how much distortion our eyes are actually capable of. For this experiment to work, I recommend you play the video in full screen on your device so you'll have a nice big image. Okay, now take a look at this diagram, and you can clearly see that the squares and lines are pin-cushioned or distorted. Now close one eye and slowly move forward towards your screen. As you move within a few inches, you'll find that these distorted lines will actually become straight as you get closer. And if you then slowly back up, all of a sudden you'll see a fisheye effect occur. Crazy, right? So those are the anatomical numbers. But how does that relate to a lens? Well, that's where the effective focal length comes into play. And this is where things get more useful for filmmakers. If you take the field of view of the human eye and compare it to a full-frame camera, the human eye is often approximated at around 22 to 24 millimeters. That's because when we talk about the field of view of human vision, we're talking about everything you can see at once, not just the area you're paying attention to. When you look straight ahead, you're not just seeing the object you're focused on. You're also seeing the edges of the room and maybe a little bit of your hands, movement in your periphery vision, all at the same time. In total, the human visual system covers about 200 degrees horizontally, which no single lens really reproduces without going into fisheye territory. So the 22 to 24 millimeter equivalent focal length is just the closest match to our overall usable field of view without distortion. But here's where it gets really interesting, and where another focal length you might have heard as the human vision equivalent gets its argument. Even though our overall field of view is extremely wide, the sharp part of our vision is actually very narrow. The center area of the retina, called the fovea, is the only part that sees fine detail. That area behaves much more like a 40 to 50 millimeter lens. And if you want to see how small this sharp zone really is, stare at one word on your screen right now. Again, to make sure this will work for you, make sure you're playing the video in full screen. Now check this out. While looking at this one word, everything else, even the words immediately next to it, already losing detail. That's your foveal vision at work. So when filmmakers talk about a lens that matches what the human eye sees, they're usually referring to the perspective of central conscious vision, not the wide-angle periphery stuff. And that's where the 50 millimeter focal length gained its reputation as the lens that matches human perspective. Not because it matches the field of view, but because it matches the perceived perspective and sharpness of the area we're actually focusing on. So let's recap this because the numbers can get confusing. The physical focal length can be between 17 to 22 based on what you're focusing on, resulting in a camera lens equivalent of about 22 to 24. However, when using perceived focal length and sharp vision as the determining factor, we get something closer to 50 millimeters. All three sets of these numbers are correct, they just refer to different aspects of how we see. And that's why many people have a solid argument for what they determine is correct. So what does that mean for filmmakers and photographers? If you want a shot that feels close to human perspective, a 40 or 50 millimeter lens will usually give you the most natural sense of scale, depth, and compression. If you want something that matches the width of what we can perceive around us, then 24 millimeters is a great choice. Another interesting idea would be to use a 24 millimeter lens, but then add a slight peripheral blur to create a 40 to 50 millimeter equivalent sweet spot. I haven't seen that done too often, but I say why not? It's a creative medium. The real takeaway here is that the human visual system is far more complex than any single focal length can replicate. That's why lensing is such a powerful storytelling tool. Every focal length communicates something different, and knowing this can help you choose the one that matches the feeling, perspective, or realism you're going for in your next project. Oh, and one last thing before I let you go. Remember, all of these focal length equivalents are for a full frame camera. If you're using Super 35 or an APS-C sensor camera, remember to do the calculations for your crop factor, or you'll end up with a focal length that's much longer than it should be. If you like these videos, please subscribe and feel free to leave a comment about a future video you might want me to make. This kind of feedback helps me understand what you want to learn, and it ensures I can keep making helpful and educational content. Until next time, thanks for watching.